The time has come for my people to go.
I'm not a queen, I'm a servant of the people. I'm not a king, I'm a servant of the people. It's what the people demand, and we're gonna keep fighting till we get that land. I'm not a queen, I'm a servant of the people. I'm not a king, I'm a servant of the people. It's time to rise, to get what we want, we got to organize. Good morning, good afternoon, good day, good evening, good nights, good people, good comrades. This is another episode of Pantsula Podcast. And I am Jamilah, here with comrade Sadiq. And we are here representing the All African People's Revolutionary Party, or the A-APRP, which you might know it as. The objective of the A-APRP is a unified socialist Africa. I'll say that again. It is a unified socialist Africa. So Africa is the base. Africa is primary to us, but we also understand that Africans such as ourselves are also in the diaspora. We're around the world. Thank you for listening once again. And of course, without the ancestors, which we thank every single episode, without the work they've done, we would not have the work to do to leave forward to the future generations, because it may not end in our lifetime, but oppression and capitalism is going to end, and we definitely see it. It's happening right now as we speak. And I don't know about you, Sadiq, but I, for one, am very happy about that.
Yeah, definitely excited for the topic and to get into the nitty gritty.
Yes. Who are ancestors today?
Yeah, so the ancestors today, first being Richard Allen, who's an African minister, educator, and writer. Also a bishop who was active, influential, one of the influential African leaders. He actually founded one of the first African Methodist Episcopal churches, the AME churches. You know, it was actually the first Black African denomination in the U.S. back in 1794 in Philly. He was elected the first bishop of the AME Church in 1816. He focused on organizing a denomination in which free Africans could worship without racial oppression, and enslaved people could find a measure of dignity. He worked to upgrade the social status of the African community, organizing Sabbath schools to teach literacy, and promoting national organizations to develop political strategies. A quote from Allen is stated, "We will never separate ourselves voluntarily from the slave population in this country. They are our brethren. We feel there is more virtue in suffering privations with them than a fancied advantage for a season." The AME Church grew rapidly amongst the freed Africans in the South. So when you think of the AME churches that we still have today, think of Richard Allen. I want to thank Richard Allen for his contributions to the struggle of African liberation. Next is June Jordan. June Jordan, born on July 9th, 1936, was a poet, teacher, and activist. She was queer, who explored in her writings the issues of gender, race, immigration, and representation. She was very passionate about the work that she's done with her poetry and teaching, as well as teaching others to treat it as its own language and an important outlet for expressing African culture. Jordan was inducted to the National LGBTQ Wall of Honor within the Stonewall National Monument in 2019. So also want to commend this ancestor here as well for her works and struggles. But with that said, I know this topic will be centered around the recent bill that's been talked about that's set in motion to possibly be passed in Uganda by the reactionary Museveni dictator over there. So I know we're going to start off with just opening the floor for discussion on the bill itself and possible ramifications of the bill.
Yeah, before we get into that, I wanted to say with the Episcopal Church and the AME Church, there's also the history with Denmark Vesey and a lot of the organized movements, the freed enslaved African movements there. So there's a big history. And so this concept that religion and politics don't mix or whatever, that's absolutely not true. I just wanted to say that for sure. And yeah, there's this bill, this anti-gay bill. It is one of many countries that are anti-queer, anti-homosexuality bill 2023. And the funny thing is they are using essentially a British parliamentary system, if I'm not mistaken. So this idea that homosexuality, they're bringing homosexuality from the West, but you are using a legal system, which is colonialist in nature. You are inspired by these bills from these funds from these right-wing Christian groups. So everything that is inspiring this bill and the anti-queer sentiments are taken directly from colonialism, and yet they're saying being gay is a colonial transport. It doesn't make any sense. Make that make sense. But we will definitely, if Sadiq, before I just go off, if you want to describe this bill.
It's been a lot of talk on the bill itself. I believe the bill was initially talked about or sought to be initiated back in 2014, but for various reasons, it got shut down, and it looks like it resurfaced as of recent in relation to criminalizing people for what seems to be displays of homosexual acts, even identifying as as a queer person, I should say. It's pretty much a whole different level of persecution just of your gender or sexual identity, which is something that queer people face around the world. And it's, I think, just to kind of back your point too, in relation to this whole idea that some Africans have that, us being queer is just indigenous to Africa. It's like, as you laid out, so many countries within Africa that have these bills imposed on them, or not bills, but laws imposed on them, anti-queer laws imposed on them, haven't repealed them. They've been intact, since the colonial period. So that goes to show that these are transfers or hangovers from colonialism. So I think we shouldn't be mistaken to think that this is, indigenous to Africa or whatnot by any means.
Yeah, you're saying the criminalization of being queer is not indigenous to Africa.
That's yeah. That's okay.
Okay, I was like, wait, what?
Make that clear. I'm like, I'm all over the place today, but that's what I'm sorry.
So this bill is looking at quote unquote gay sex as being punishable. In some cases, acts they deem unsavory, you are punished to death under this bill. It is punishable with life imprisonment. And as I said, death in some cases. They're talking about the quote unquote promotion of homosexuality. They're talking about different toys. The question I have from what I've seen of this bill, it doesn't describe heterosexual people using said toys and doing said acts. Is that also deemed criminal? Is that an arrestable offense? Is that deemed worthy of death if you are heterosexual and doing these same things? I just have not seen this in the bill. Maybe it's there, but it's doing the same thing that you're seeing all around the world, and recently, of course, in the United Snakes with Tennessee, etc., and Florida with the Don't Say Gay bill, which ended up being law not too long ago. They are doing this under the guise of, quote, protecting children. There are a lot of children who are groomed by heterosexuals. So it's just really disturbing. So it talks about protecting children and youth who are made vulnerable to sexual abuse through homosexuality and related acts. It is protecting Ugandan culture from sexual rights activists. So this language is very similar to what we hear in the West. To say that this is against African culture, but using the same exact language, it doesn't make sense to me. Make all of this make sense. So it prohibits, of course, same sex, or I'm going to add same gender, sexual relations, and their promotion or recognition, unquote. Talks about dealing with emerging threats to the traditional heterosexual family. Not even Uganda, not so long ago, or maybe even longer, had a history of having queer political officials. So I just, again, do not understand what is happening, because the only way I can connect it to is colonialism. So we had a Ugandan king, Mwanga II. He was reported to have engaged in said gay sex that is now being criminalized and considered being punishable by death if this becomes law. So there's a report, interestingly, from the International Business Times, talks about martyrs were being burnt to death between 1885 and 1887 on the orders of Mwanga II for denying him gay sex. So I don't agree with that. People did convert to Christianity and they denied. They're like, I'm Christian, I don't support that. And he burnt them to death. Not saying I support that. This is not something I want to do. You shouldn't force people into it. Definitely not. But the point of this is Uganda had a king who was queer. This is in Uganda's history. So to say that this is against Uganda, this is against Africa, it's factually incorrect.
Mm-hmm.
Uganda, I'll say it again, had a queer king.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
You know what his name was? King Mwanga II.
Especially for those who love the monarchs, that's one there for you to remember. And I think even what you're saying in relation to religion, I'm just saying this, there's no way you can read the Quran and not be against oppression of any form. In the Quran, it states for us to stand up against. You could look at it like in almost every chapter, you find something in there where it's revealed for us to fight against oppression. And the one ayah verse that stands out is tyranny and oppression is worse than slaughter. That goes to show that we should take active stances. So it doesn't matter who it is. We're taught as Muslims to not just stand against oppression when it's Muslims or people of the book, people of Abrahamic faith are being oppressed. It's any type of people, any groups of people. We're taught to treat everyone with respect and humility, no matter who they are, what stances they may take or whatever the case is. The only time we impose something on people is when they try to pose something on us, like in terms of press us or do something to us, right? Then we defend ourselves. But even with that, we don't transgress limits when something is being done to us. But overall in all, we see that, queer people are being oppressed, whether it's in Uganda or here in the West or wherever the case is. We should stand against that because that's unjust. We're told from God, from Allah, to stand against that. So if you call yourself a principled Muslim, and you can't just center everything around just rituals. Even in the Quran, it tells us to not this deen or religion is not just about facing the East or the West. It's about doing good deeds, standing against injustice. So forth and so on, giving back to the needy. That's also something you see throughout the Quran heavily, giving back to those who are in need as well. It's not just about, oh, well, I got to recite this when I walk into the mosque. It is about that to a certain degree. Not saying you can't do those things, but I think it's dialectical. It's like, yeah, that's important. But if you just censor that, you miss so many other components of the message that is told upon us to act on for us to be the most pious people we can be.
And I want to add to that from an Nkrumah's Ture's Cabral's perspective, because I mentioned ideology at the beginning of this episode. And one of the tenets or the rules of conduct, which you see at the beginning of the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, is do not take so much as a stitch from the masses. And to me, that component is taking a life.
Yeah.
That stitch is a life that you took that is on the front lines of the revolution based on your colonialist ideas of who is and who is not human. If we deem ourselves revolutionaries, we have to understand it takes all of us to do that work together to organize against the forces of oppression. And there are so many folks of marginalized genders, folks who are queer, folks who are women, people, regardless of who they love, who they identify as, the way they live their lives, they are on the front lines. And your desire and your actions to take that away, that is one less person to create a better world for all of us. So you don't deem that person human, and they are doing the work that you most likely are not doing. They're on the front lines. So I'm going to say that again, do not take so much as a stitch from the masses. That stitch is all of us. So respect the humanity of those who put in that work every single day in the best way they can. Not only being on the front lines of dealing with systemic oppression, but the things that happen in their own lives based on economic inequities, based on educational or housing inequities, based on gender inequities, health inequities, all of these things, just dealing with those everyday things. And people choose to still be on the front lines because they understand the systemic connections to oppression. And you want to steal, you take a stitch from the masses. I really think it's important to keep that in mind when we think about this, because this is not just, oh, this is gay people and it's anti-African or whatever. We have to understand it takes all of us to create the world that we want to have. Yeah. And folks who are marginalized, whether that's gender, whether it's orientation, are part of that.
Man, it reminds me of another, to paraphrase, there's another verse in the Quran that talks about Allah talking and says, like, what's the matter with you that you don't fight on the side of the people who are being oppressed? I think for us, the Muslims, there's no way you can see stuff like this going on and just keep quiet. No one should be oppressed for your faith or not, because you see what's happening in Palestine. We see what happens in other parts of the world where Muslims may be oppressed for wearing a hijab or whatnot. And we should understand that those things aren't happening in isolation. That is tied to a system too as well. The system, this is where you use religion as a material force, where you materialize Shaitan, Satan, as a physical force, or his minions, maybe not just him himself, but people who are working on the side of Shaitan, and that be the U.S. empire, imperialism, and whatnot. It can't just be solely just the metaphysical. We have to correlate the metaphysical to the material reality too, because if you know Satan or Shaitan can influence you to do bad things, and to lead you off the right path, that manifests itself in so many ways, not just you on your interpersonal, but it works and manifests its ways into systems and groupings of people who want to exploit, plunder, and whatnot. As Muslims, we should look at it through that lens, or just people who believe in a religion or spiritual system.
We've definitely made our point, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we definitely did.
Please do not steal so much as a stitch from the people, because all of these stitches create a blanket. Mm-hmm. Just remember that. Do you have any final words for this episode before we end?
Just one thing I want to rehash, just final remark from what we talked about during our work study session. People who come out and say, oh yeah, well, they're indoctrinating us and they want us to be queer. One, as you laid out, Jamilah, this has been, before TVs were even thought of centuries ago, there were queer people in Africa. So whether we have TVs and social media or not, people just start becoming queer because of TV and social media. That's a fallacy. Because they've seen other people, that's just what it is. And also, if you you don't like something, you just don't like it, right? Like I made the analogy earlier on. I don't like calamari. I'm just not gonna eat calamari. Right? Like no one, who's gonna talk you into be like, even if you try to act and you don't like it, then that's just not for you. You're not queer. So that's cool. But if it's for you and you're like, oh, I actually like this. This is what I'm attracted to these people and whatnot. Then you're queer. So, so I don't know what the hiccup is when people just say you could be talked into or convinced into being queer. Either you just like what you like, right? It's really not that hard. It's not. People try to make this whole oh my God, it's no. Are you going to be talked into it? And if you did the act once and because your favorite celebrity said it and you hate doing it, whether it's calamari or it's burgers or whatever, you don't like eating it, you're just going to keep eating it because your favorite celebrity told you to keep doing it. That's nonsensical. That that does not make any sense. And anyone who does that, then it's Ramadan. I can't say anything crazy, but yeah. Anyone who says that, I don't know. Just gotta reevaluate your life. But yeah, that's all I gotta say.
I did want to say that it's actually legal in 22 countries in Africa where same gender loving relationships are accepted and not criminalized. I wanted to especially mention that in Guinea-Bissau in 1993, queer relationships were legalized. And of course, Guinea-Bissau is the home of the PAIGC, our family. There are no laws criminalizing same gender loving queer relationships. So we have to remember that how being queer is seen in Africa is not universally African. That's another thing we need to understand. In some countries, there were no laws at all. It's just like you are you, whatever. So we have to understand it's not universally seen as criminal. And I'll just say this: organize, organize, organize. Because that is how we're going to get to the place we want to be at as a liberated people. If you enjoy this content, we have other content you can look at. There is the weekly Pan-African News, which is, of course, it is twice a month. And we have our Ancestors' Voices, which is on Sundays. We have Revolutionary African Women. We have the Forward Ever podcast, and we also have the Forward Ever shop. If you want to support the work of this movement and you are doing this work and you want to show it yourself, there's lots of links you can go to, which we will have in the description. And as we say, forward ever, backwards never.
Forward.